In Part 1 of the history of Peckforton Light Railway, I showed how the railway evolved from digging the first sod in 2004, through its early days of track-powered operation and my increasing frustrations with it, to my experiments with battery power and radio control in 2012. In this part, we continue that story. It was in 2013 that I discovered Deltang radio control equipment. At that time, Deltang was very new to the model railway market, but everything looked very promising. The equipment was relatively inexpensive. The receivers had built-in electronic speed controllers, and yet were only about a quarter of the size of a credit card. But they were packed with loads of features. I dived in and bought a transmitter and a couple of receivers and started experimenting. My first dedicated battery-powered radio-controlled loco was an IP Engineering Lollipop railcar. It was very cheap, and so wouldn't be a great loss if it didn't work. After a few experiments, I quickly realized that the Deltang system would meet all of my requirements, and maybe even more. So, the model was completed, tidied up, and entered service as a permanent way trolley. I next turned my attention to the double-ended Ford rail motor I had bashed from a couple of resin coach kits in 2012. It had been a great disappointment. The 3 commercial mechanisms I had tried were underpowered and also extremely fragile. The flimsy nylon gears just weren't up to the job. I ditched those gearboxes completely and invested in an MFA Como gearbox motor and a couple of bevel gears. Wow, what a difference! Buoyed with success, I fitted it with a 12-volt lithium-ion battery, a Deltang receiver, and lighting controlled by the transmitter. The next candidate for battery radio control was an IP Engineering Jesse Diesel Loco kit, which I had acquired second-hand for a very modest price. It was constructed as per the instructions, and then finished in Peckforton Light Railway livery. A Deltang receiver was installed and hooked up to an M-Tronics small diesel sound card. I had figured out how the card could be triggered from the receiver. I was on a roll. Unfortunately, just like the rail motor, the Jesse suffered from gearbox problems. After 3 replacements, a friend fixed me up with a bespoke gearbox using some old Triang Loco gears. That saw me through a whole year of intensive running. In principle, I had proved that Deltang radio control was workable. So, it was time to try it out on something a bit more ambitious. I've always loved the Southwold Railway, and so it seemed only natural that I should construct one of their locos, number 4, Wenneston. The chassis for the Zillertal Barn U-Class loco I had bought second-hand in 2008 was near enough in overall dimensions, and had the all-important Walchart's valve gear. So, with a pile of plasticard, a ruler, and a craft knife, I set to work. She turned out far better than I could ever have expected, and what's more, under radio control, she was controllable and powerful enough to haul the longest freight trains and do the shunting without stopping and stuttering. And my loco sound card was fitted in Celebration. I had become an enthusiastic radio control convert, maybe even a radio control zealot. So, where next? Why stop at one Southwold loco? 242 Sharp Stewart Loco No. 1 Southwold was constructed, this time on a Playmobil 4-wheel motor block. I'd lost confidence in making my own mechanisms. Although the Playmobil motor block wasn't anywhere near the quality of the LGB mechanisms, to my eyes she looked pretty good steaming about on the Peckforton Light Railway. My fleet of battery radio control locos was steadily increasing, but I was still running my track-powered locos alongside them, which meant having to engage in tedious track cleaning and maintenance for electrical continuity. Meanwhile, I was steadily improving the infrastructure of the railway, A new viaduct was made by meticulously gluing on hundreds of individual balsa stone blocks. And a dozen 1930s conical milk churns were made, using the ends of a pack of cheap plastic party toys. 2013 had turned out to be a very productive year for the Peckforton Light Railway. By 2014, my ongoing battles with the Jessie Loco mechanisms had come to a head. I invested in a USA Trains motor block. Although its wheelbase was longer than the original chassis, I squeezed it in and fitted the fly cranks to its extended axles. The old axle holes were filled in and the underframes weathered, and she re-entered service. She is now one of my most reliable runners. Of course, I couldn't resist the temptation to scratch-bash another battery radio-controlled loco. I've always been attracted by the 3-foot gauge Manning-Wardle saddle tanks, and so, when I found a drawing of one, which served on the Davington Light Railway, and discovered that the Pico 060 motor block was about right, Loco number 6, Hart Hill, came into existence. I have found that there are some in Garden Railway circles who pour scorn on battery-powered locos' capabilities, but I'm very pleased with the controllability and pulling power of all my battery locos, particularly this 060 Pico-powered beauty. Here she is, pulling 25 wagons up a 1 in 40 gradient without so much as a murmur. I came to a momentous decision and sold off all my track-powered DCC equipment. I was now fully committed to battery radio control. The first of my old track-powered locos to be converted was my Barclay 240. The improvement in slow running was immediately apparent. With the help from my mate Greg in Australia, I adapted a Deltang points controller so it could remotely operate the 7 sets of points on my railway, which are the most difficult to reach. And in September, Greg and his wife came to stay for a while. He brought with him one of his Australian rail cars, which spent a week or so happily pottering about on Peckforton Light Railway metals. The American Jackson Sharp coaches, which I had bought in 2008, with a view to one day turning them into something more appropriate for the UK, were attacked with a razor saw and, with a bit of tweaking, turned into something vaguely resembling Leaken manifold coaches. They continue to provide good service. A few more wagons were anglicised and given removable loads, appropriate for the community served by the railway. And the resin station buildings, which were installed in 2009 and had remained outside continuously, were given what I believe is referred to as a makeover. Probably the most important development in 2015 was the widening of the copper mine sidings and the lengthening of Beeston Market Station. This enabled me to run track through a hole in the garage wall into storage sidings. Until now, I had had to transport rolling stock in storage boxes at the start and end of every running session. Whilst the sidings didn't speed up this process, it was far more enjoyable and less damaging to my back and to the rolling stock. The engine shed was eventually moved to the other end of the station to give more room in the good sidings. The disruption at the copper mine led to the installation of a 32mm gauge feeder railway, supposedly to bring ore and spoil from the mines to the crusher shed and loading chutes. A second-hand Houston Gate Loco Works loco was acquired, equipped with Deltang radio control, and the receiver programmed to provide auto shuttle, one of the many extra features which are built in to Deltang receivers. An IP Engineering Simplex Loco was constructed from a kit and Deltang radio control installed. It was bought to run on the 32mm line, but I was so impressed with it that I got a 45mm chassis so it could run on the main line as well. The model is clearly proportionally more powerful than its full-sized equivalent. A couple more track-powered locos were converted to battery power. The most difficult part is finding room for the batteries, but using lithium-ion cells helps a great deal, as each cell holds 3.7 volts. I was also experimenting with various ways of installing sound in my locos, such as this Allen Bond programmable card, this modified MP3 player controlled by commands from the transmitter to the receiver, and a recordable greetings card module, which is very small and very, very cheap, at under £2. My various experiments with Deltang equipment, to get it to do the different jobs I wanted it to do, were leading me down a path I was all too happy to follow. Little did I know that after constructing my own Deltang transmitter, the future was going to take quite an unexpected turn. All will be revealed in Part 3.